Hi everyone, it's Lisa Mears. Thanks for joining me today. Today I'm going to be working with some brand new products from the Pretty Pink Posh June 2022 release. I will be working with the Layered Rhodes Stencil, as well as the Across the Miles stamp set and some other products from the Pretty Pink Posh shop. And before I get started with my tutorial, I do want to mention that these cards are part of a Pretty Pink Posh Instagram hop. I will have more information down in the description box below as well as on my blog, and the link to my coordinating blog post will be down below as well. So this is the Layered Rhodes stencil. It is a 3-layer stencil, and I'm going to go ahead and show you how I use this stencil. So first off, I have a piece of Bristol smooth cardstock cut to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and then I'm taking my stencil A and I'm positioning it where I want it over top of the stencil. I'm just using some magnets to hold it in place, and this is the stencil that will allow you to ink up your grassy area on the background that you're creating. So I'm going to start out with my Twisted Citron Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to go ahead and ink up the areas as you see me doing on screen. So this is going to be a little hill here on my stencil, and then that part of the stencil right above that green, that's actually where the road is going to be. And you'll see here in just a moment that stencil B is actually going to have an open area in that spot that's going to allow me to color in my black for my road. So here I'm just coloring in all of my Twisted Citron ink in all of these open areas on my stencil because I wanted to have grass. Now if you wanted to, you can actually create a blue sky in the very top white area that I haven't colored in yet. So you can actually have your roads down below with the grass, and then right now where I'm coloring the green, you can then instead color in some blue ink in order to create a sky above that top road. Now this stencil actually has 3 roads, but I'm only using 2 of them. So there is another section at the very bottom that will allow you to use a straight road, and I'm only using the 2 curved roads on this particular card background. Okay, so I'm finished up with my Twisted Citron ink. Now I'm going to come in with my Mowed Lawn, and I'm going to add a little bit of a darker green in certain areas on this stencil. So I'm just adding a little bit of that Mowed Lawn ink to the top and bottom edges of where the road is going to be, and also at the bottom edge of the cardstock layer. I'm also going to add some of this darker green ink to the top and bottom edges of where the road is going to be on the top of that card panel. So I just wanted to add some darker colors to my lighter green just to have some contrasting colors there. And then I'm going to add some of that darker green along the top edge of that cardstock layer. And then I'm going to come in again with my lighter green ink, the Twisted Citron, and just go over where the dark ink and the lighter ink meet just to blend those out a little bit better. And of course, if you want to add some more dark ink, depending on how dark you want to go, how much contrast you want to have between these colors, you can continue to add more ink. Now I'm going to go in and just add some more Mowed Lawn ink, but this time I'm just tapping on the cardstock layer just to add some more texture all over that grass area. And now I'm going to remove stencil A, and you can see what that looks like so far. Moving on, I'm going to add stencil B. Notice that this stencil is a mask. It's going to cover up the green area and only display the white area. So this stencil will allow me to color up the roads. You can see that this stencil has 3 roads. I'm only using 2 of them. There is a straight road at the bottom of that stencil, which I'm not going to be using on this particular card. The ink that I'm using is the Black Soot Distress Oxide ink, and I'm just going to go over all of the openings on this stencil layer B with the Black Soot ink to get a really nice, deep, dark black impression for my 2 roads. And here's a look at what this stencil looks like. Now I'm going to add my stencil layer C, which are the white lines on the roads. So I'm just using some white pigment ink, and I'm going over all of those dashed lines on both of those roads to create a really nice white impression for those lines. And here's a look at the completed background once all 3 layer stencils are applied. I'm going to use the same stencil to make another background. This time I'm going to go in the portrait orientation, and this time I'm only going to be using the straight road, which is the one that I did not use on the previous card background. So what I'm doing is I'm starting out with my stencil layer A. I'm positioning it on my Bristol Smooth cardstock, which I cut down to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. And I don't want to use the parts of the stencil that are towards the top of the stencil. So what I did is I just put some masking tape over the parts that I do not want ink on. I only want to add a thin layer of green to the very bottom of the stencil, as well as that large open area of the hillside that you see me coloring in right now. So I'm using the same method that I used in the previous stencil. I'm applying the Twisted Citron Distress Oxide ink to those open areas. Then I'm going to come in with the Mowed Lawn ink, and I'm going to add some more contrasting greens to this grassy area. I'm going to add some to the bottom edge and also to the sides of my cardstock layer, as well as towards the top of the hill. Next, I'm going to just tap that Mowed Lawn ink all over the front of that green area just to add some more texture and definition to all of the grassy areas. I'm going to go ahead and remove stencil layer A. So I'm going to remove the mask and then remove the stencil. And next I'm going to come in with stencil layer B, and I'm going to line it up with those grassy areas on the background. Once I have it in place, I'll add my magnets, and this time I'm going to add some more masking tape to the open area above that grassy area because I don't want to have another road on the top of this background. I just want to have the one road at the very bottom of this background. So I'm going to go ahead and ink up the straight road at the very bottom with the black Soot Distress Oxide ink. I'm going to go over that a few times to get a really dark layer of black ink. And then I'll remove that stencil, and I will go ahead and add the third stencil. This is stencil layer C. I'll line up the road with the dashed lines and add my white pigment ink to those dashed lines. I wanted to see if I could get an even brighter white, so I'm taking a white gel pen over all of those lines on the stencil and just coloring over all of those lines. And it did end up being a little bit brighter, but there's not much of a difference there. Those of you that have been following me for a while know how much I love to make scene cards, and I'm doing just that to this card. So I'm taking my layer A, and notice how I put the cardstock through the middle road opening. And what I'm doing is I'm lining up that grassy area so that it serves as a mask because I want to create a sky on this card. So I'm going ahead and putting down my magnets to hold that grassy hill area in place while I put some Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink all over the white area. So that stencil is going to serve as a mask so I don't get any of the blue ink over top of my grassy hill. And I'm not worried that I'm leaving some areas white. I wanted to go with a very light hand because I'm going to be adding the Layered Clouds stencil from Pretty Pink Posh over top of this. So with my first mask in place, I'm adding the Layered Clouds stencil right over top of the Layered Rhodes stencil. I'm going to hold that down with my magnets and take my Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink and go over top of all of those clouds. So this time I'm adding a little more pressure with my blending tool to add a little bit more of a darker blue color, and you can see when I released that stencil that those clouds show up as a darker blue in the sky. So this time I removed the first stencil and I'm adding the second stencil for the Layered Clouds stencil, and I'm adding some more Tumbled Glass ink over top of the remaining clouds. I'm going to go ahead and remove that stencil, and now I have a really fun background with a sky, grass, and a road. Now I need to bring in some stamps to complete my scene, so I'm going to be using the Cross the Miles stamp set. I went ahead and stamped out some cars. I'm also going to be bringing in a sun and a butterfly from my Hugs stamp set. I stamped these images onto some Bristol Smooth cardstock with some Versafine Onyx black ink, and I'm coloring them up with my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. I will have all of the colors listed on my coordinating blog post. So if you're interested in duplicating any of these colors, do take a look at that. So for the red for this car, I only used 2 markers. I used the Carmine red as well as the blender. The blender allowed me to blend out the darker red color into the white area of the stamped image just to create some shading. For the wheels, I used the gray as well as the blender. And for the windows, I used the light blue. Moving on to the truck, I am using my blue marker as well as my blender marker. Now, if you don't have a blender Zig Clean Color Real Brush pen, you can simply use a water brush or a paintbrush with some water on the end of the bristles. The blender brush that I'm using, it serves the same purpose as a water brush, only it doesn't contain water. It has a blending solution inside of the pen. So here I'm coloring up the wheels. The wheels again are gray, and then I use my blender brush, and then I'm also coloring the gray for the bumpers, and I also have the yellow for the headlight and the bright yellow and yellow marker for the car. So I do add some of the bright yellow, which is the darker yellow, add some of the yellow to blend those together, and then I'll use my blender for the remaining white area. The window is going to be light blue as well as the blender. Same thing with the wheels. We'll go ahead and color those up in the same gray color as the previous wheels on the other vehicles. The brake light is going to be in the Carmine red as well as the stop sign. I'm going to have the Carmine red on the edges and then use the blender to fill that in. In addition to the traffic light, the Carmine red for the red, the yellow, as well as the emerald green, and the gray for the darker areas of the traffic light. For the sun, I'm using the same bright yellow and the yellow markers as well as the blender. And then for the butterfly, I use the violet, the English lavender, and the blender. And for the center of the butterfly, I'll come in with the orange. And after I color all of these images up, I will die cut them with the corresponding dies. For the stop sign, I need to have a stand, so I stamped out another traffic light and then just cut off the stand part of it. I'm just going to add some glue and add that stand to the bottom of the stop sign. I went ahead and placed all of my images where I want them to be on my scene, and now I'm just going to glue them all down. For the sentiments, I stamped them out onto some white cardstock and just used my scissors and fussy cut them out. So I stamped out vroom, I stamped out beep, and I also stamped out the larger sentiment, sending smiles across the miles. Notice how it shows as 2 images here on my card front, but it's actually one stamp. So I stamped it out once and then I just fussy cut it out so that it is 2 different stamped images, because the larger stamp wasn't going to fit on my card the way that I wanted it to fit. I didn't want it to go over the road at all, so I wanted it all to display in that grassy area, so I just snipped it apart to make one sentiment into 2. And finally, for this card, I'm going to add that layer to an A2 size card base. My A2 size card base is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and it is just a white card base. And that completes that card. For my second card, I wanted to finish up the scene with some flowers. So I have this border that I've already stamped out and colored. I actually colored this up a while ago, so I honestly don't remember the colors that I used for this. In fact, this might have been colored with some Copic markers. This set is called the Love Borders set from Pretty Pink Posh, but instead of using it as a full border, I'm just going to fussy cut out some of the flowers because I didn't want to use it as a border. I just wanted to pick out some of the flowers to include on my grassy hill on my scene. I'm also going to be using the picket fence die from Pretty Pink Posh, and I just die cut that out of some white cardstock. I'm going to use that die right above my road, so it's going to look like all of these flowers are in a little grassy area separated by the picket fence. So I'm going to go ahead and glue down my picket fence, and when I add that picket fence to the card front, I'm going to make sure that the bottom edge lines up with the edge of that road. So I'm going to go ahead and press that down. It does extend beyond that card layer, no big deal. I will snip that off. And then I'm going to go ahead and glue down all of these flowers. I do want to tuck a few of the flowers behind the picket fence, and then the other flowers will just be scattered all along that grassy hill. I have another car that I went ahead and colored off camera, but I colored it exactly the same way as the car in the previous card. And because that car is going to be glued down with the top half of the car over top of the fence, it's going to need another layer of cardstock on the bottom half of that car in order for that car to sit flat on my card front. So what I did is I just took the die and die cut a piece of white cardstock. I cut the white cardstock piece in half, and I'm gluing it to the bottom half of the car. That gives me a little bit more of a layer there and builds up that die cut piece so that my car is going to sit flat on my card front. So I'm going to go ahead and add glue and add it to my card. And then I will go ahead and attach the sun, and then I'll turn that card layer over and I'll snip off the fence that is extending beyond the left and right edges of that card layer. Before I add the butterfly to the card, I am going to stamp out the sentiment. So I place that card front into my Misti and I position the sentiment where I want it, and I'll go ahead and ink that up with some black ink and stamp it down. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add my butterfly that it's facing toward the sentiment. And now I'm ready to add this to an A2 size card front. So I'll just put glue on the back and add it to my card base. My card base is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I just love this cute little scene. I honestly think that this is my favorite stencil from the entire June release. And if you missed that release, I will put a link to that release at the end of this video. You can go back and take a look at everything that's included in the Pretty Pink Posh June release. And as always, if you're interested in any of these products, there are links down in the description box of this video. If you like this video, please click that thumbs up button. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.